Temi's hands would not stop shaking. She stood knee-deep in the river, the cold black water wrapping around her legs like fingers, the midnight air pressing against her skin like a warning she refused to hear. She held the small school uniform above her head, the white fabric catching the moonlight, and she opened her mouth and said the words Baba Agba had taught her. Once, twice, the black powder dissolved into the current, spreading like ink, like sin, like something that could not be taken back. She said the words a third time, and then something moved behind her. Not the wind, not an animal, something else, something that exhaled. She turned around. The scream that left her body did not sound like her own voice. It came from somewhere deeper than her throat, somewhere that had already understood what her mind had not yet accepted. The darkness that swallowed her eyes was not the darkness of night. It was absolute. It was permanent. And as she collapsed into the shallow water, the uniform floating away from her hand, one thought surfaced above the terror. She had done this to herself. If you are watching this for the first time, subscribe now and turn on your notifications because this story is going to shake you from beginning to end. 3 months before that riverbank, Lola was laughing. She was standing in the middle of her farm, her wrapper tied firm around her waist, her head tie slightly crooked from the morning walk, and she was laughing because her yams were coming up thick and strong, and the rains had been kind, and her son Kolade had just run through the rows shouting that his teacher had called him the most brilliant student in the entire school. Lola threw her head back and laughed until her stomach hurt. She pressed her palms together and said thank you to no one visible and everyone invisible. This was her life now. Not easy, never easy, but hers. Her husband Dare had died 6 years before, a snake bite in this very farm, gone before the sun finished setting on that Tuesday. Lola had buried him, held her son, cried until her body had nothing left, and then she had stood up. She had taken the farm, she had learned what she did not know, she had walked when her back refused, when the rains failed, when the neighbors whispered that a woman alone could not manage land that large. She had proved every single whisper wrong. Kolade was 14 now, tall and serious-eyed, with his father's jaw and her own stubbornness. He sat under the neem tree at the edge of the farm every evening and read until the light failed. He was going to be something extraordinary. Lola felt it in her chest, the way she felt weather coming, deep and certain and unmovable. What she did not feel, because she was not looking for it, was the woman watching her from the path. Temi had been her friend since they were girls small enough to share a single wrapper between them on cold Harmattan mornings. They had grown up together, argued together, attended each other's weddings. But something had shifted years ago, slowly, the way a house shifts on bad ground, not all at once, not with noise, just a quiet leaning that one day becomes a crack you cannot explain. Temi's husband Bello was not a bad man. He was simply not a working one. His farm had failed 3 seasons in a row, not from drought or disease, but from neglect, from long afternoons under the shade, from the way he waved away urgency like it was a fly that would find somewhere else to land. They had no children. Temi had been to 3 different hospitals in 2 different cities, and each one had sent her home with the same soft eyes and the same careful words and the same empty arms. She watched Lola laugh with Kolade, and something moved inside her chest that she did not have a clean name for. She walked into the compound, and Lola turned and smiled wide. "Temi, see how God is good this morning." "He is good," Temi said, and her mouth shaped the words correctly, even as her chest tightened around them. Kolade greeted her with respect and ran off to help with the harvest baskets. Lola pulled Temi into the shade and brought out cold water and fried plantain, and they sat together the way they had always sat, knees almost touching, voices low and easy. And Lola talked about the farm and the yams and the community meeting on Friday and Kolade's teacher who believed he could qualify for the government scholarship to study abroad. "Abroad," Lola said, the word sitting in her mouth like something precious. "My son, abroad." Temi smiled. She smiled very carefully. "That is wonderful news." She went home that evening and sat in her compound in the dark for a long time. Bello came out and asked why she had not started dinner. She looked at him for a moment, at his soft hands, his unbothered eyes, his complete absence of ambition, and she said nothing. She went inside and started the fire. But something had been decided in that silence, something that had no mercy in it. The poison she used was not bought from any market. It came from a woman 3 villages away who asked no questions and accepted no explanations. She mixed it into Bello's evening pepper soup on a Thursday, watching him eat, watching him praise the flavor, watching him retire to his mat. He was dead by Saturday morning. The village mourned. The women came and held Temi and called it sudden illness, the kind that takes a strong man without warning. Temi received their comfort with downcast eyes and did not correct them. She inherited the land. She planted, she tended, she waited. The soil gave her nothing. Every seed rotted or refused. Every planting season ended the same way: brown stalks, empty rows, cracked earth that seemed to be rejecting her specifically, personally, with intention. And across the village, Lola's farm multiplied. The night Lola's compound erupted in celebration because Kolade's scholarship had been confirmed, Temi stood outside the fence and listened to the drums and the ululation and the voices of people who loved a woman she had grown up beside. She stood there for a long time. Then she walked away without making a sound. She went to find Baba Agba before the week finished. Stay with this story. Drop a comment below and tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? The path to Baba Agba's dwelling was not a path most people acknowledge existed. It moved through the back of the forest, where the trees grew too close together and the light thinned into something unreliable. Temi walked it at dusk, her wrapper pulled tight, her face set. She was not afraid. She had already done the thing she could not undo. Fear had left her the morning she watched them carry Bello's body out of the compound. Baba Agba was sitting outside when she arrived, as though he had been expecting her for some time. He was old in a way that had nothing to do with age. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had heard too many things whispered in the dark and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He looked at Temi the way you look at a wound, not with shock, but with assessment. He said, "Sit." She sat. He said, "The widow's son, you want to touch his future." Temi did not ask how he knew. "The scholarship," she said. "I want it to fall apart. I want the boy to feel. I want her to feel." She stopped. "What?" Baba Agba said quietly. "What do you want her to feel?" The word sat in Temi's throat like a stone. "Loss," Temi finally said. "I want her to feel what loss is." Baba Agba was quiet for a long time. The forest made sounds around them that Temi chose not to interpret. Then he said, "What you are asking does not bend. It breaks, and it does not always break what you are aiming at." Temi pushed a pouch across the ground between them. He looked at it, he looked at her. Then he reached out and picked it up. Baba Agba told her what she needed and she listened without blinking. Fingernails from the boy, something he wore close to his skin, the river at midnight, black powder that he would wrap in a leaf and tie with red thread, the incantation spoken 3 times without stopping. And one rule above everything else. She must not look behind her while standing in the water. Not for any sound, not for any voice, not for anything that called her name. If she turned, whatever was moving in the dark behind her would have her eyes before she finished the thoughts. Temi nodded and stood and walked back through the forest without a word. She stole the fingernails from Kolade's bathing area on a Wednesday evening, sweeping them carefully from the stone ledge where he left his things. She took his school uniform from Lola's drying line at midnight 3 days later, the white fabric soft in her hands, still carrying the faint smell of soap. She held it for a moment longer than necessary. She did not let herself think about what she was holding. She folded it and put it inside her wrapper and walked home. The night of the ritual arrived the way dread always arrives, quietly, without announcement, already inside the room before you notice it. Temi stood at the river bank and removed her slippers. The water was colder than she expected. It climbed her ankles, her shins, her knees, and she waded in until it found her thighs and stopped.
The forest on both sides of the river was absolutely still. No frogs, no insects, nothing. Just the water moving around her and the sky pressing down with a moon that was too bright for what she was doing. She unwrapped the black powder. She threw it into the current and watched it spread, watched it darken the water in a slow bloom that moved downstream like a stain. She raised the school uniform above her head with both hands. She opened her mouth and began. The first incantation left her lips and the air shifted. A pressure, like the moment before thunder, like something vast turning its attention in her direction. She did not stop. She said it a second time, and the water around her legs began to feel different, heavier, deliberate, like it was listening. Her hands trembled above her head, but she did not lower them. She said it a third time, and something behind her exhaled. Not wind, not water, a breath, close, warm against the back of her neck despite the cold night air. And then her name, spoken so softly it could have been imagined, except that she felt it in her spine. Temi. She turned around. The darkness took her eyes before the scream finished leaving her body. She did not remember falling. She did not remember the water filling her mouth or the uniform floating away from her hands, or the way the current pulled at her wrapper as she collapsed. She remembered only the black. Not the black of closed eyes, not the black of a room with no light, but the black of something removed, something gone, something that was not coming back. They found her at dawn, face down in the shallows, barely breathing. Meanwhile, in Lola's compound, Kolade woke up burning. The fever came without warning, sudden and vicious, climbing his body temperature until Lola pressed her palm to his forehead and pulled it back like she had touched a coal. She called his name and he answered, but his eyes were glassy and wrong, and he did not sit up properly. Lola tied her wrapper fast and ran for the compound elder's wife who knew herbs and had handled fever before. She ran back with a bundle of leaves and her hands shaking, and she knelt beside her son and began. Kolade, Kolade, look at me. Look at my face. He turned his head slowly. Mama, he said, and the way he said it, thin, confused, young in a way he had not sounded in years, cracked something open in Lola's chest. I am here, she said. I am not going anywhere. You hear me? I am right here. She boiled the leaves. She bathed him with the water. She prayed out loud and did not care who heard her, pacing the room, talking to God with the familiarity of a woman who had been in dark rooms before and been brought out of them. She pressed her forehead against Kolade's and whispered things only a mother knows how to say. The kind of words that are not really words, that are just love with sound attached. By the second night, the fever broke. By the third morning, Kolade sat up and asked for food and complained that his legs felt weak. And Lola laughed so hard she had to sit down on the floor. She covered her face with both hands and laughed and wept at the same time, the way relief sometimes comes out of a person when the body cannot decide which emotion to release first. You frightened me, she said when she recovered. Kolade looked at her with his serious eyes. I saw something, Mama, in the fever. I saw a woman in a river. She was holding my uniform. Lola stood still. Her face, Kolade said. I knew her face. Neither of them said Temi's name out loud, but it sat in the room between them, solid as a third person. Across the village, Temi was found and carried home, and the first thing every person who looked at her eyes understood was that whatever had happened to her was not a sickness medicine could touch. The white that had replaced her sight was not the white of illness. It was the white of consequence. Neighbors whispered. The women who had once sat with her after Bello's death now stood at a careful distance. Children were called inside when she walked past, guided by a long stick, her compound silent in a way that had moved past loneliness into something else entirely. She stopped eating properly. She stopped speaking. She sat in her compound in the mornings and turned her face towards the sun she could no longer see, and made no sound. And the guilt was the loudest thing. It was louder than the village, louder than the whispers, louder than the darkness behind her eyes. It was a sound like Bello's voice praising the pepper soup, a sound like Kolade saying Mama in that thin fever voice, a sound like Lola laughing in her farm with her head thrown back, thanking God out loud. Temi had spent years being eaten by jealousy and had not noticed how much of herself was gone until she sat in blindness and silence and found almost nothing left. 6 weeks after the river bank, on a Tuesday morning, Temi stood up. She found her stick. She straightened her wrapper with careful hands. She walked out of her compound and turned towards the center of the village, and she did not stop until she reached the square where 3 women were sorting beans, and 2 old men were sitting near the baobab, and a group of children were chasing a dog in circles. Everyone went still when they saw her face. "I have something to say," Temi said, and her voice came out steadier than she deserved. "And I need people to hear it." More came. Word traveled the way it always traveled in a small village, fast and total. By the time Temi began speaking, there were 30 people in the square. She told them about Bello, the pepper soup, the pouch from the woman 3 villages away. She told them about Baba Agba and the instructions she had followed with a cold and deliberate heart. She told them about standing in the river in the dark, holding her childhood friend's son's school uniform above her head, wishing ruin on a boy who had done nothing to her except exist as evidence of a life she had failed to build. The square was completely silent. Someone was crying. Temi could not see who. "I poisoned my husband," Temi said. "I tried to destroy Kolade's future. I did these things because I could not bear watching Lola live well when my own life felt like punishment." She stopped. "Jealousy told me her blessings were the reason for my suffering. It lied. I was my own reason. I just needed someone to blame." She heard movement in the crowd. She heard a woman's footsteps. She recognized them, had recognized them since they were children sharing that Hamatan wrapper, walking towards her steadily without hesitation. Lola took Temi's hand. Temi's face broke completely. The tears came the way rain comes after a long dry season, sudden, total, without apology. "I tried to hurt your son, Lola. I tried to—" "I know," Lola said quietly. "How are you standing here?" "Because hate is too heavy," Lola said, "and I have been carrying enough for long enough." She held Temi's hand tighter. "Carry this no further. It has already cost you everything it is going to cost you." 3 days later, Lola stood at the motor park with Kolade's bag at her feet. He was dressed well, his scholarship letter folded in his breast pocket, his shoes clean, his eyes bright and forward-looking, and full of everything she had worked towards since the evening she buried her father in that farm 6 years ago. She held him for a long time before he boarded. "Come back as something great," she whispered into his shoulder. "I will," he said, "I promise." She stood and watched the bus until it turned the corner and disappeared. She stood there a little longer even after it was gone, smiling at the empty road, her wrapper straight, her chin up. Behind her, the village went on, women pounding, children running, someone playing a radio too loud. Ordinary life, the best kind. And in her compound, Temi sat with her hands folded in her lap, her face turned towards the sound of a celebration she could not see, breathing quietly in and out, learning slowly how to live inside the consequences of the seeds she had watered. The trap is never built for the foot that avoids it. If this story moved you, like this video and subscribe so you never miss another one. And before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one.